My friends, this story from the Daily Mail is a really good example of our political dysfunction. AOC bursts into tears as Iron Dome's $1 billion funding is overwhelmingly approved in House. 420 votes to 9. Rashida Tlaib is accused of anti-Semitism by fellow Democrat after she called Israel a violent apartheid system. 9. That's what AOC represents. She got 12 million followers on Twitter. This is what you need to understand. I'm going to start off and I'm going to give you the hard facts and then we'll talk about this stuff. AOC does not represent her district. AOC represents fringe political individuals across the country who funnel money into her district, which she uses as a vehicle to sit in Congress. I'm not saying that as to disparage her character, but to point out her ideas probably don't fly in her own district. The things her district cares about, they probably don't know what she's talking about. But as Nancy Pelosi said, you could take a glass of water with a D on it and it's going to win in Nancy or AOC's district. That's what Nancy Pelosi said, my or her district. So what happens is there's no real Republican competition. There's no strong primary. AOC has too much money from external sources. The same is true for other squad members. Their politics are popular with fringe political groups, but a fringe political group is still substantive when they can coalesce online and funnel funding to politicians like AOC. This manifests in AOC wanting to defund Israel's defensive system. The Iron Dome isn't bombing children. It's protecting Israel from rocket attacks. Now, by all means, criticize Israel for all that stuff. I'm just saying, Iron Dome, that's the job it does. If you want to defund Israel or something like that, why take away the Iron Dome of all things? Well, that's what AOC tried to do. And as you can see, overwhelmingly, beyond overwhelmingly, you get to see that AOC is shown what her politics really represent. Nobody. Now, I will say, there are a lot of conservatives, libertarians who are pointing out, yeah, but we shouldn't be funding the Iron Dome. Why is the U.S. giving $1 billion to Israel for this? And my attitude is not, I'm actually partially in agreement with that. I actually think it's a great argument. Why are we funding all this stuff? Even South Korea, even in Germany. That being said, and we can discuss this, it represents that AOC is not in alignment with where most people in this country are when they think about providing support to our allies. Now, people can certainly say Afghanistan is bad, but Israel's a different story. It's an ally of the United States in a war-torn Middle East that provides stability, and people support that, whether you agree with Americans' foreign policy or not. I think we can see here perhaps just good evidence. Aside from all the stories where you see the media lying, there's another good example of how broken our political system is. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts. Want to jump in?
I saw, I think it was around Occupy Wall Street that something came out and said that Congress is doesn't do what the American people want. They do what their business associates want. So I think that this massive 460 to 9 vote or whatever isn't necessarily indicative that the American people want it, but that the politicians and their business contracts want it.
Mm-hmm. I somewhat agree with you. It is true that Congress public opinion typically does not move congressional votes. But I got to say, man, I do think the majority of Americans want to make sure Israel's not blown off the face of the earth.
That's definitely a big sticking point, especially just even when you look at moderate Democrats. I mean, they still have a healthy respect for Israel. And, there is still a very big religious section of our country. And, Israel holds this specific significance, whether or not you want to debate against that or you want to debate for that. A lot of people, Israel's still near and dear to them. Now I have the question though for AOC. Why she want to see brown people get blown up? Why? And again,
it's a mindless talking point.
It is.
There's a legitimate talking point in why are we providing funding, to these foreign, we should, America first is an argument, right?
Yeah.
We should fix the pipes in our own cities and the streets and the infrastructure but then there's there's a legitimate argument for the Middle East is horribly destabilized. Israel is a stable nation. They're an ally.
Yes.
I get the argument on the libertarian stuff about funding and foreign policy stuff. Okay, I get that. But we're not talking about sending in troops. We're not talking about, occupation. We're not talking about allowing them, selling weapons to the Saudis. We're talking about the Iron Dome. Now, if you want to talk about Israel being bad in terms of how what's going on with Gaza and the missile strikes, I'm fairly moderate on this one. I do think I think the real argument comes from the libertarian position, not necessarily just right wing, just the general. Why are we focused on foreign excursions? The founding fathers said we shouldn't be doing this kind of stuff, and we are. Okay, fair point. most Americans, I think, recognize that we have international allies and that Israel is particularly vulnerable with all of these different places in the Middle East that want to blow it up. So we provide them with military support. And out of 3.5 trillion, $1 billion isn't as much. I got to say, if you come to me and you tell me that they want to do 12 million for Pakistani gender studies, I'll be like, that's insane. If they say, we think there should be a missile defense system for Israel, I'm like, well, that I understand. Yeah. Now, I'm a bit of a milquetoast fence sitter on this one. There's a foreign policy argument versus a supporting our allies argument. The point is, AOC doesn't represent doesn't represent America in this regard. I think she doesn't represent America on most anything. She represents the fringe minority.